I'm going to leave it to Kristian Ruby from Your Electric to give us a little wrap up to kind of put things together here for us. Kristian? Maybe?
Can you hear me?
We can.
There you go. There you go.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to wrap up here. This was a fascinating discussion and let's say a peek into what we in Your Electric call the electric decade, into the realities of this fascinating decade. I try to say a few things about those three key elements that the discussion has been evolving around: the resilience piece, the prosumers, and the needed modernizations for let's say making those two things happen at the same time. First of all, I wanted to say on the resilience part, this is something that we've been very preoccupied with in Your Electric, and I thought it was truly fascinating to hear the stories from around the world on, or especially, of course, Europe and the Americas of how this is unfolding, and not least how quickly companies are able to respond and in a fairly short amount of time bring people back online. The sort of the two sort of let's say reflections it left me with were the differences in the phenomena that we're seeing on the one hand in the Americas and Europe, but how they are basically, you know, the actions on the utility side that are needed regardless of the phenomenon, and how we need to respond. The other thing that struck me was that when we assessed the investment needs in the grid space over the next 10 years in Europe, and Torsten has been referring those numbers of 400 billion euros over a matter of 10 years. We estimated that we were looking at somewhere around 8% of all investments going exclusively to the issue of resilience. Having listened to the discussion today and knowing about how we see the future in terms of increased occurrences of extreme weather, I wonder whether we're on the low side with the 8%. In any case, this is something that needs proper tools, and I know that Arshad Mansour from EPRI has some very interesting ideas about digital tools that could be developed with a specific view to sort of coupling energy system thinking together with weather analysis and what we know about how the weather systems are evolving. And then as a last point here, I found it very interesting to hear how Torsten was saying that when responding to extreme weather events and how they destroy the grids, they're not only looking at making them crisis-proof again, they're also looking at making them future-proof. So in a way, taking the opportunity of a very sad event to make something better of it. And I think that particular situation perhaps also has a very strong pedagogical effect on the regulator, because you can't have a long discussion on whether you're going to rebuild if everything has been flooded away or disappeared in a big fire. You have to do it, and hence maybe those occasions are really an opportunity to make the necessary investments for the decarbonized grids and for the more electric world that we're all looking into. And that brings me to the second part, which is about the prosumers and that electric world that we believe we have to create in Your Electric, and that is very fast becoming a reality. I think it's fair to say that in Europe, the roaring 20s for electricity have truly arrived. In 2020, 1 in 10 cars had a plug. That's the new cars coming onto the market. In 2021, it was 2 in 10 cars, and we expect this to continue. At the same time, governments are unveiling massively ambitious projects for electrification of heating systems, rolling this out, and it's often local authorities. It can be state level, it can be national governments, but often it's also just happening spontaneously locally. And we're beginning to see the grid constraints of all those things happening at the same time. There was a fascinating anecdotally story in my local press about a grid region losing power on the very sort of cusp of Christmas Eve when everybody put their turkey in and were charging their cars and turned on the TV and also had their heat pumps running. Everything just cracked, and they had to play Christmas reverse by eating the cookies first and dancing around the tree until they could start cooking. So the issues are real, and that leaves us with a question of, let's say, how we modernize the grids, because we're only at the beginning of this journey. We're looking into some 50 million electric cars on the roads in Europe by 2030, just 8 years from now. We're looking into millions and millions of heat pumps coming onto the grids. We're looking into some 350,000 megawatts of renewables coming onto the local grids, that is, as a consequence of the decentralization of generation. So we're looking at a wholly different future that requires grid modernization, reinforcement, digitization right here, right now. And so to the discussion about AMI, I think there's just no way around this. I mean, that's very clear from a European perspective. We're only going to deal with this if we have an infrastructure that can optimize, that can be flexible to a very high extent. The flip side of this, of course, being cybersecurity, that is yet another challenge that's becoming very sort of predominant in Europe since we're facing escalations of the situation around Ukraine, and we know that the Russians are very good at playing cybersecurity games with our IT systems, but also with our grid systems. It all boils down to the discussion that we've had here at the end about the regulatory environment that needs to stimulate these changes, and this intriguing discussion about complexity versus simplicity. I think it was interesting what Lawrence said about tell the story in a good way. For me, it's definitely about telling the story and probably also cutting through the noise, because somehow we need, we can talk about investment signals and all the fine aspects of how to get the incentives right. But at the end of the day, this is about, waking up the regulators. It's about shaking them up good and say, if you don't get your game straight now, you can forget about where we're going or those targets that the politicians have set. And how are you going to like that? How are you going to, like to be the culprit or the villain? Because let's face it, the regulatory approach with a regulator that needs to rubber stamp all the plans and that was conceived in a time where the grids needed to be stable. Today, we need to evolve at lightning speed to catch up or to keep pace with electrification and decentralized generation. So we just need to drive home that message really forcefully with regulators to say, we need you to change. We need to work in a different way with you. You need to set us free so we can do what's necessary for the customers, for the energy transition. We need to overinvest now, because overinvestment is so much cheaper than underinvestment. And that's, I think, the key message. Can we then get a more simplified regulatory system? I don't know, but when I look at the European electricity markets, and we just had a discussion with the CEOs, I can just say it is a very complex framework. On the other hand, trying to reboot it now would just undermine, let's say, investor certainty. So So I don't know whether we can reinvent for something which is really, really simple. A few things on those, let's say, on those simplifications that could help us get the investments flowing. TOTEX over separation of OPEX and CAPEX is very clear, should help DSOs make the necessary decisions without over-explaining. Time of use was mentioned, and I thought the Spanish idea of looking both at consumption and capacity was interesting. Then I personally feel that local markets, as were discussed, are an asset for the transition. With all those decentralization tendencies I mentioned, with all the electric cars coming, the need for local flexibility is going to be enormous. And our markets in Europe are structured around transmission level wholesale markets. Can we really optimize those kinds of movements 2 voltage levels away in the future if everything or so much goes local? I think we need to have a proper framework for flexibility procurement for DSOs. That will be critical for this to work. And I think that can be done in a sufficiently, if not simple, then low complex way that would work for most companies. I guess that would be my sort of take on what I've heard today. Thanks again, and let me just end then with the, let's say, with the plead. Let's tell that story very forcefully to the regulators. It's now or never. So stop. Don't stand in our way. Let us make those investments we need. Let us do what's necessary for our customers and for the system to be modernized for us to facilitate the transition.